So Beyonce may have just strategically leaked information that Oprah Winfrey cannot be trusted. And before you dismiss this as just another celebrity feud, you need to understand that the specific evidence coming out about Oprah's connections to a man who ran what prosecutors literally called a sex slave farm is not new. The pattern is decades long, and the real story here isn't just that Beyonce is trying to save herself from the Epstein files, it's that Oprah's entire empire might have been built on looking the other way while the most vulnerable people on earth were being exploited. And the details are genuinely disturbing. But before I get into the absolute mess of evidence that keeps piling up around Oprah, make sure you're subscribed to Metro Society so you don't miss any updates when more of these documents inevitably leak. The thing that makes this whole situation feel different from regular Hollywood backstabbing is the timing and the specificity of what's being circulated. A never-before-seen document from the Department of Justice leaked online containing information about how Jeffrey Epstein was allegedly paying Beyonce and Jay-Z millions of dollars to essentially function as operatives inside the Black community. Now, the DOJ released some files earlier this year, but they made it very clear those weren't everything they had. A lot of names and images were redacted for privacy reasons, and honestly, the version the public got to see was heavily sanitized. But someone on the inside decided to get messy a few days ago and leaked more of the unredacted material. And one of those documents contained direct allegations that Epstein had Beyonce and Jay-Z on his payroll specifically to be moles. And I need you to sit with that word choice, moles, because it implies a level of intentional infiltration that goes way beyond just attending a party or taking a photo with someone. We're talking about a coordinated effort to embed themselves within communities, to gather information, to report back, to function as eyes and ears for a man who was running one of the most extensive trafficking operations in modern history. That is a completely different category of accusation than simply being photographed at the wrong dinner party. Now, Beyonce was already linked to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking rings stretching all the way to Nigeria, and Jay-Z was previously outed for allegedly assaulting a woman alongside Harvey Weinstein at one of Epstein's parties. So this isn't their first time being named in connection with this network. But instead of Beyonce coming forward and addressing any of it directly, what appears to have happened is that her team allegedly started circulating incriminating evidence about Oprah to redirect the public's attention. And honestly, the strategy worked because once people started looking at Oprah's history, the sheer volume of questionable associations became impossible to ignore. It's a classic misdirection play, and in Hollywood, misdirection is practically an art form. You don't defend yourself against a damaging story by directly confronting it unless you have an airtight alibi. What you do is you find someone else whose dirt is even more compelling, and you make sure that dirt ends up in the right hands at the right time. And if you're Beyonce and you've spent decades building a reputation as untouchable royalty, you don't let something like an Epstein payroll document take you down without dragging someone else into the spotlight first. Let's talk about John of God, because this is where the story gets truly stomach-turning. Back in 2010, Oprah interviewed this Brazilian faith healer and even traveled to his center in Brazil to film segments portraying him as a deeply spiritual figure with miraculous healing abilities. She gave him her platform, her endorsement, and introduced him to millions of people who trusted her judgment. What she either didn't know or chose not to investigate was that John of God was running what investigators later described as a baby farm and a sex slave operation. He was raping women and girls, he was trafficking children, and he was doing all of this while operating under the cover of spiritual healing. Oprah's interview gave him international credibility. When he was finally exposed and arrested, Oprah tried to distance herself completely, acting as though she was just another person who had been fooled. But here's what doesn't sit right. Oprah has resources that ordinary people cannot even imagine. She has investigators, researchers, entire teams dedicated to vetting the people she features. The idea that nobody on her staff caught wind of what this man was doing when local Brazilian journalists have been reporting on the rumors for years before her visit requires a level of willful ignorance that is genuinely hard to believe. And let's be real about what willful ignorance means in this context. It means you have the means to know the truth and you actively choose not to pursue it because the truth would be inconvenient for the story you want to tell. Oprah wanted to tell a story about a miracle worker, about faith healing, about spiritual transcendence. That narrative was good for ratings, good for her brand, good for the aspirational messaging she's built her entire career around. A story about a serial predator hiding behind religious iconography doesn't fit that brand, so you simply don't look for it. You don't ask the questions that would lead you to answers you don't want to have. And if John of God was an isolated incident, maybe you could give her the benefit of the doubt. But it's not isolated. Oprah's name came up in the Virginia Giuffre lawsuit involving Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And while Oprah has denied any involvement, the connections keep surfacing. She was photographed with Harvey Weinstein repeatedly during the years when his behavior was supposedly Hollywood's worst kept secret. She has been linked to Diddy, and given everything now coming out about him, that association is aging terribly. The pattern is always the same. Oprah positions herself next to powerful people. Something horrific is later revealed about them. And she claims she had no idea. At some point, the wrong place, wrong time excuse stops working. It stops working because the statistical improbability of one person accidentally associating with this many predators becomes astronomical. One association might be bad luck, two might be a coincidence, 3, 4, 5 spanning decades and continents and industries, and you have to start asking whether the common denominator is the problem. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa opened in 2007, and Oprah spent $40 million building it. It was supposed to be a safe haven for disadvantaged girls from grades 8 through 12, a place where they would be protected and educated and given opportunities their circumstances would otherwise deny them. And almost immediately after it opened, the whole thing became a nightmare. Several students went missing. A dorm matron named Virginia Makopo was arrested in November 2007 and charged with sexually assaulting multiple girls. Oprah offered a public apology to the parents and the children, citing her own history of abuse in that apology, and the matron was later found not guilty. But then the school was hit with another sexual assault allegation. 7 students were suspended for harassing and fondling their classmates. People started asking why these children would be acting out in this specific way, and the rumors began swirling that something systemic was happening inside those walls. Then investigators found the body of a newborn baby in a girl's book bag, a newborn in a book bag at a school for underage girls, and somehow, after all of that, the public conversation just moved on. Think about the sheer horror of that image. A child gave birth, presumably in secret, presumably in conditions of fear and isolation, and the baby ended up dead and concealed in a book bag. That is not a normal school incident. That is not the kind of thing that happens in a well-supervised, truly safe environment. That is a catastrophic failure of the entire premise of the institution. And yet the media coverage around it was remarkably contained. Oprah issued her statements, expressed her devastation, and the news cycle politely moved along to the next thing. If that had happened at a school run by almost anyone else, the investigation would have been relentless, the documentaries would have been greenlit immediately, and the career consequences would have been permanent and absolute. The theories about girls going missing from Oprah's school never fully went away, and the speculation about what that school's real purpose might have been has persisted for over 15 years now. I'm not saying I know definitively what happened there, but I am saying that if any other celebrity had opened a school and multiple students had gone missing and a dead baby had been found on the premises and multiple sexual assault allegations had surfaced within the first year, we would still be talking about it. That person's career would not have survived. Oprah's did. And that survival in itself is a kind of evidence. It tells you something about the protective machinery that surrounds certain people in this industry, the way stories get buried, the way public outrage gets redirected, the way some figures become too big to fail no matter what happens under their watch. There's an old episode of the Oprah Winfrey Show that people who remember it have been searching for, where an abuse survivor allegedly came on and spoke about witnessing dark ritualistic practices. According to people who saw it when it originally aired, the episode basically vanished afterward and was never rebroadcast the way her other interviews typically were. In the clip that does circulate, the woman describes being very young and being forced to participate in something that involved sacrificing an infant. She says it was for power. And Oprah's response in that moment, instead of pressing for details about who else was involved or where this happened, was to pivot to a discussion about how abuse can feel physically good to a child who doesn't have the language to understand what's happening to them. She says, quote, "I have friends who had children who were 7 years old and someone is stroking your penis, it feels good." Even though you don't have a name for what that is, it feels good. And I understand the point she was trying to make about how abusers manipulate children's bodies and how confusing that can be for victims. But the context in which she said it, immediately after a woman described being forced to participate in infant sacrifice, is jarring in a way that feels like a deliberate derailment of the conversation. It feels like someone who heard something on live television that was not supposed to be said, something that opened a door to a room the audience was never meant to see. And the only option was to change the subject as quickly and as dramatically as possible. And the fact that the full episode has apparently been scrubbed from the archives, that people who remember watching it cannot find it anywhere, only adds to the suspicion that someone decided that particular conversation needed to disappear. The way Oprah treats Black men versus white men in these situations is another thing people have been pointing out for years. When the allegations against Michael Jackson surfaced, Oprah was quick to platform the accusers and give those stories oxygen. When Kobe Bryant was accused, Gayle King, Oprah's closest friend and longtime collaborator, went after his legacy barely a year after he died, asking questions that Snoop Dogg and others called out as disrespectful and predatory. Snoop was furious. And he said something that a lot of people were thinking: where is this same energy for Harvey Weinstein? Where are the hard-hitting questions for the white men Oprah has been photographed with for decades? Gayle King never ambushed Weinstein with uncomfortable questions on national television. Oprah never did a takedown special on any of the powerful white men in her orbit who later turned out to be predators. The double standard is so glaring that you cannot unsee it once someone points it out. Black men who achieve a certain level of success and then face accusations, get the full investigative treatment, the somber sit-down interviews, the probing questions about accountability and justice. White men who have been credibly accused of horrific crimes, men Oprah has dined with and celebrated and promoted, get the soft focus, retrospective treatment, or more often, complete silence. That is not an accident. That is a calculated editorial stance maintained consistently over decades. 50 Cent was one of the first major figures to call this out publicly, and he did it years ago. He said Oprah caters to older white women, that her audience is his audience's parents, and that she was completely against everything in his music. He said he could never be on her show because she had no interest in platforming someone who didn't fit the narrative she wanted to present to her core demographic. And he made peace with being her enemy because he felt like the friction was more honest than pretending they were on the same side. He understood something early that a lot of people are only now beginning to grasp, which is that Oprah's empire is built on a very specific kind of respectability politics, a version of Blackness that is palatable and non-threatening to the white suburban women who form the backbone of her audience. Anything that challenges that framework, whether it's gangster rap or an uncooperative actor or an allegation that doesn't fit the preferred narrative, gets either ignored or actively suppressed. Ludacris had a similar experience. He went on Oprah's show to promote the movie Crash, a critically acclaimed film he was genuinely proud of, and instead of letting him talk about the project, Oprah ambushed him with criticism of his rap lyrics. He said later that he didn't feel like that needed to be said in that setting, that she could have disagreed with specific songs instead of dismissing his entire artistic perspective, and that the whole thing felt like she was trying to make him look bad in front of her audience rather than having an actual conversation. And that's the thing about how Oprah operates. It's never presented as a disagreement between equals. It's presented as a moral authority passing judgment from a position of unimpeachable virtue. She doesn't debate you. She disciplines you in front of millions of people and frames it as concern or wisdom. Then there's Monique, who has been saying for years that Oprah, Tyler Perry, and Lee Daniels blackballed her after she refused to continue doing unpaid promotion for the film Precious. Monique says they wanted her flying overseas on her own dime doing press for free. And when she refused to play the Hollywood game the way they demanded, doors started closing. Taraji P. Henson opened up more recently about being underpaid and exhausted while working on The Color Purple, saying she almost had to walk away from the project because the compensation was so inadequate. She asked publicly where her raise was, pointing out that she hadn't seen an increase in her income since Proud Mary. And she said she had to take a stand because if she didn't, she would be making it harder for the next generation of Black actresses to demand what they're worth. These are not isolated grievances from difficult personalities. These are multiple credible Black women across different projects in different years describing the same fundamental dynamic. Oprah's machine demands compliance, loyalty, and sacrifice. And if you push back, you will be punished in ways that affect your ability to make a living. Dave Chappelle tried to warn us about all of this back in 2006. When he walked away from a $50 million deal with Comedy Central and disappeared to Africa, the media narrative was that he had lost his mind. He was painted as paranoid, unstable, someone who couldn't handle the pressure. Oprah had him on her show, and the entire interview was her trying to steer him toward admitting he had mental health problems. She kept asking if he was paranoid, if he had gone to a psychiatric hospital, if he had been prescribed medication. And Dave kept trying to explain that there were industry politics behind why he left, that the deal came with strings attached, that he wasn't comfortable with, that he felt like people were trying to control him or discredit him. He said they were trying to get him to take psychotic medication, and he refused because he knew what that was really about. And Oprah just kept circling back to his mental state, refusing to let him fully articulate what he had allegedly seen behind the scenes. Watching that interview now, knowing everything we know about how Hollywood operates, Dave Chappelle doesn't look crazy. He looks like someone who saw something he wasn't supposed to see and got out before it was too late. He looks like someone who understood that the machine was not going to let him speak his truth on a platform that size, that the entire purpose of the interview was to manage the narrative, to reassure the public that the man who walked away from $50 million was simply unwell rather than principled or informed. And Oprah played her role in that narrative management perfectly because that's what she does. She's the validator, the legitimizer, the person who tells America how to feel about something. And in that moment, she told America that Dave Chappelle was a man in crisis rather than a man with a warning. The relationship between Beyonce and Oprah has always seemed solid from the outside. Oprah was at Beyonce's tour, raving about how empowered she felt, saying she could eat raw meat after watching that performance. Tina Knowles was on Oprah's show talking about how she put Beyonce and Solange in therapy at a young age when it was still considered taboo in the Black community. They've had a public mutual admiration society for years. But this is Hollywood, and loyalty isn't real when survival is on the line. Beyonce allegedly decided that the best defense was a good offense, and she had the receipts on Oprah ready to go. That's not a random act of betrayal. That's someone who has been keeping files. That's someone who understood that in this industry, information is the only currency that actually holds its value. And you never know when you're going to need to spend it to save yourself. The fact that Beyonce apparently had this material queued up and ready to deploy suggests a level of strategic foresight that is honestly impressive. She didn't scramble to find dirt on Oprah when the Epstein documents started circulating. She already had it. She had been collecting it, organizing it, waiting for the moment when it would be most useful. And that tells you something about the true nature of these relationships. The public warmth, the mutual praise, the sisterhood narrative, all of that is the performance. Underneath it is a cold, calculation that both women understand perfectly well. The thing I keep coming back to is how consistent the pattern is. Oprah builds relationships with powerful, often predatory people. She gives them her platform and her credibility. Something terrible is later exposed. She expresses shock and sadness and distances herself. The public moves on. Rinse and repeat. John of God, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, the South Africa school, the missing girls, the dead baby, the buried episodes, the selective outrage depending on the race of the accused, none of this is new information. What's new is that someone with as much to lose as Beyonce apparently decided it was time to start leaking it. And when someone at that level of fame and power starts burning bridges with someone at Oprah's level of fame and power, it's usually because they know something we don't yet. They've seen the unredacted files. They've been in the rooms, they've had the conversations, and whatever they know is serious enough that they're willing to detonate a relationship that took decades to build because preserving that relationship is no longer worth the risk of going down with the ship. The question now is not whether Oprah's empire was built on looking the other way. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is what else is about to come out and who else is going to start talking when they realize the walls are finally closing in